Rightio, there we are. We are on. Nathan Kinch, welcome to the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you, kind sir, for coming on, and also at such short notice, my friend.
Mate, I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to see what we can cover in the time we got.
Yeah, we do, and I'm looking forward to it too. I think first things first, for the basis of just giving some audience some context there. I mean, phenomenal turnaround time. I reached out to you, I'm pretty sure, if not 24 hours ago, let's just maybe wrap it into 48, but the power of the World Wide Web. But no, once again, I do appreciate you spending the time, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. First things first, I often like to sort of, so sometimes I sort of read out, the big guest long profile, which I just don't think, I don't know. Sometimes I actually like to put it back on. I mean, who knows themselves better than themselves, right? So I guess for the audience out there, yeah, just give a kind introduction.
Yeah, well, that's a philosophical can of worms, self-knowledge, but I'll bypass that for a moment. So my name's Nathan. I sometimes go by Nate. I find it's pretty easy, one syllable, rhymes with mate. How can you forget it? I'm an ethicist, an organisational designer, and a trust researcher, and I've spent most of my career trying to figure out how do we use the power and the prowess that we have as a species to do more of what truly matters and less of what doesn't. And that's been applied across lots of different contexts. I've done a huge amount of work in and around what we typically now would refer to as AI, recognizing that the definition of what AI is seems to be almost all-encompassing now, and there are some problems with that. But biotech, financial services, particularly around literacy, fairness, the ways in which information can be healthily, effectively, and relatively safely processed, for decent sort of like financial well-being outcomes. A lot of work in the health space, ranging from kind of like disability care and aged care type stuff all the way through to more like common clinical kind of settings. So a real mixed bag. But again, the general idea has been like, how do we use the power that we have as a species to do more good in this world? And at times that has been very challenging, because that comes into conflict and tension with the way that things can work. But mate, I'm trying to stick with the process as best I can. Hopefully that's helpful.
Very, very helpful. Look, you're very intelligent, you're very academic, and you use very large words. But let's draw into this, because I got this from your LinkedIn effectively, and you've stipulated drawing from philosophy, cognitive science, systems theory, and related disciplines. I help ambitious organizations become trustworthy by design.
Mm-hmm.
In layman's terms, what does that mean exactly?
So, at the moment,
I know it's hard for such an intelligent academic brain like you, Nathan. It is very hard to put it into speak where you're speaking to potentially either a 13-year-old or a pet rat.
Pet rats are probably smarter than we give them credit for in lots of ways. Really quite adept general problem solvers, but right?
Okay. Well, now we're so
let's go. No.
Not the rabbit hole. We're going down this rat hole.
The rat hole, yeah. Look, let's give it a good crack. So, at the moment, let's just take a corporation, and it's a little bit different if it's a different type of organization, like a government organization or whatever, but probably less different than a lot of folks think. So, corporation, its goal is to maximize shareholder value. It's part of a neoliberal capitalistic sort of paradigm in which capital accumulation is the ultimate goal. And so the corporation is trying to sort of optimize to get better at doing that, day after day, week after week, month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year, right? To sort of serve this particular narrow form of growth. And we've gotten pretty good at doing that. The problem is, the better we've got at doing that, the worse it's been for the world. Like the relation between the gross domestic product and environmental degradation is like this. Like it's somewhere between 99 and 100% correlated. So what does it mean to become an organization that's trustworthy by design? Well, what I'm trying to help organizations do, and recognizing it's a process, it's not going to get done overnight, is go, all right, let's take a hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, like, are we really the type of organization that we want to be? Are we really doing the most good for the world that we can, recognizing what we think we know now because of modern science, etc., about the relationship between our activities and the way that that affects the environment more broadly, and just people's capacity to live good lives? And the answer is always no. Of course not. All right, so what can we do better? Well, I look at three specific sort of deep qualities or characteristics: benevolence, integrity, and competence. And we can describe those very simply. Benevolence is basically like, is the organization acting in the public and planet's best interests? If not, how do we get them doing more of that? For integrity, it's, well, how tight is the relationship between what the organization says they value and what they actually do? And at the moment, for your average corporation, that gap's huge. So how do we narrow that? And when it comes to competence, what we really mean, because those three ideas all relate to one another, is how can the organization get much better at doing good, not just accumulating capital or maximizing shareholder value, because it tends to be pretty good at that. But how can it get really good at doing good? And if we do that process well, and we give good evidence of how that process is working, we're becoming more verifiably trustworthy. And my read on the literature and my interpretation of the work that I'm doing is that that can have a wide range of benefits, recognizing none of it's ever perfect. And it's always about trying to do better on a daily basis, but it can have a wide range of benefits. And my hope is that, Luke, not just that I can do more of that work directly better, but potentially I can disseminate insights from that work so that other folks can do it without having to ever rely on me.
You and I've watched a lot of your content, and look, you do bring up these words quite consistently, you know, the likes of trustworthiness, benevolence, integrity, and competence. I mean, why those four words out of any other words that you could have picked? Why are they so ultimately important, do you think?
Look, I don't know whether they're ultimately important, because you know, there
all right, well, let's scrap that. Why'd you choose them then?
Yeah. So
you're the philosopher here.
Why did I choose them? It's like, when you look back on it, it's kind of like everything makes sense in hindsight, right? But the reality is, there was more of a
really?
Well, it can. I think it can. Everything is easier to make sense of in hindsight. And so when I look back, I kind of go,
2020 version, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, you know, and everything that anyone says can be kind of like approached from different perspectives and all, and that, you know, that's partly, you know, what the community of professional philosophers kind of do. But so when I look back, I'm kind of like, yeah, it totally makes sense that I'm approaching it this way. But in all honesty, Luke, I kind of stumbled upon that frame. It wasn't like I set out to learn about these specific things or describe my work in this way. I kind of stumbled through lots of different, I don't know, like hurdles of ignorance and naivety and little and sometimes bigger mistakes that I made. And so it's not like there's not some sort of clean picture as to why I got here. But
right,
the reason that I think trustworthiness, rather than trust, because people talk a lot about trust, but actually not that much about trustworthiness. And I don't think we have the time or necessarily even the inclination to get into all of the nuances there. But trust is like this it's kind of like I'm going to use slightly formal parlance here, but it's like a biopsychosocial phenomena, right? It's yeah. So
Which everyone knows exactly what you just meant. That yeah,
exactly.
sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what I
we
mean
use that term on a regular basis.
all the time. If you don't use that 37 times a day, something's wrong, right?
And that bar that you allegedly own, I can imagine the many conversations going around in that bar. They will throw that out on a very regular basis.
Always. So all that kind of means is it's got some biological characteristics, some sort of psychosocial characteristics, environmental characteristics. So it's this really complex phenomena. We don't quite know what it is, but we have a kind of sense, and we use lots of different approximations, ways of describing it, etc. And basically what it means, probably, and this is a working definition, is it's like someone is willing to be vulnerable to the actions of another, and it could be a person or an organization, because they have positive expectations about what that relationship might hold for them in the future. But that's
sorry to interrupt you. You just to get clear. So you don't put trust and trustworthiness in the same party.
Well, they're related, and so trust seems to be like heavily influenced by the assessment that one party makes of another party's trustworthiness. But the problem is you can't control as an organization, because I don't work directly with like your everyday sort of person walking down the street. They're not the ones that are paying my rent. So I work with organizations. So
so prejudiced. No,
I know. Yeah, I know.
I'm kidding. Yeah. No, we're well aware, mate. You only work with the utmost elite.
I look. Yeah, that's a whole can of worms itself. So trust is kind of like this variable outcome, right? That comes from all of these different things, and we still don't quite know what it is. And it's like, all right, well, if trust is sort of the thing that we want, which we approximate, and they're like push all of that complexity to the side, I kind of go, well, what can we actually what can we invest our resources in that we're reasonably confident will contribute to kind of like these good quality relationships that have lots of benefits, of which we might say, that's like trust is implicated in that. Well, we can try and focus on what it means to be trustworthy, and we can try and give good evidence of our trustworthiness. And if we do that, we're probably going to be doing a lot of the right things. We're going to be evolving our organization in lots of different positive ways. And the result of that is probably going to be better dynamics between the organization and the rest of the world, the market, the people and communities it serves, etc. And that will have lots of other kind of like benefits. So I've tried to focus on, well, what is it that we have more influence over? And it seems to be trying to become more trustworthy and then give good evidence of that trustworthiness, as opposed to a lot of the rhetoric around these issues is like, well, how do we get more trust? And again, without getting super into the weeds of the literature, which does actually becomes a little bit boring. It can, that's the kind of reasoning. So I think it's really important that we try and build trustworthy institutions, because trustworthy institutions like are existing in service of people in the planet. They kind of do what they say they're going to do, and they're constantly trying to get better at doing good. And if we have more of those types of organizations in the world, we'll probably have a better world. That's a grossly oversimplified way of describing it, but that's kind of why I've selected that narrative frame.
Yeah. No, I think that's plausible. Just for context, and I think it's important too, let's track back a little bit. You were once an athlete, correct?
Tried to be, yeah.
And then you went from athlete to working with athletes, and then moving into the world of all of this around ethics.
Yes.
Right, gotcha. Yep. Okay. So back to So what was the athletic field that you were in?
Well, I played all the sports, but I actually wanted to become a professional golfer.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and for a while.
I was hoping you'd say UFC there for just a small second.
Well, you know what's funny? I did.
It would be so unassuming, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, but funnily enough, I started. I did martial arts for 10 years and mixed martial arts for 3 years.
Oh, well, there we go. Okay.
But never wanted to be a professional because some people like getting punched in the face. I think it's overrated. So
I'll park my facetiousness because you just
yeah,
blew that right out of the water. So
no, and a lot of people think that was where my injuries kind of came from, and it wasn't. And then like you got injured from golf. How weird's that? But people don't biomechanically. Golf is actually quite first of all not very natural. Like the movement patterns that you're engaged in are not like. If you're like, hey, what's the thing that I could do that's really good long term for my body? You probably wouldn't pick golf because you got this weird kind of like angle of your spine and you're rotating around the axis of the spine.
It's a very jarring movement.
Totally. So yeah, and then I struggled through injury things and I wasn't getting better, and then my friends were getting better, and some of them are now like, you know, worth hundreds of millions of dollars because they've done really well. And then I couldn't kind of let go of that injury thing. I was like, well, if it's happened to me, it must have happened to so many people. And I'd become interested in, you know, at the time I was maybe 18 or 19, some very naive ideas about entrepreneurship. And I built what was basically a predictive analytics company. So we were using machine learning to predict the propensity that elite athletes have to incur soft tissue injuries. And when I was doing that, because again, I'm this really naive, ignorant sort of like late stage teenager.
Who's heart smart human, yeah, right.
Yeah, and I just cared and wanted to do some good. And then I came into contact with all of these confronting things, and then just started asking lots of questions. And then I realized I was kind of doing philosophy to some degree, and just started formalizing that to some extent, which took me on this sort of path and led me to where I am now.
Fantastic. I mean, how do you comprehend the game of golf? Just simply, before we will do a small segue and we'll get back to the crux of it all. But I mean, how do you comprehend the game of golf? I mean, it is quite interesting to think that it's on a psychological level. As a human, we're trying to get a ball in a very small hole that's about 500 yards away.
Yeah. So it's weird.
How do we make sense of that? And isn't that just absolutely ridiculous?
It is. It's preposterous. And even ecologically, like you just think about what we do to golf courses and what we could be doing. We could just rewild that area, and it would be so much better for the world. But the game itself is kind of weird because most sports, there is like, it's really dynamical. You know, so tennis, it's boom, 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 boom. And there's this, you know, sort of Newtonian mechanics and all this different type of stuff going on, and you're moving and you're trying to predict, but the ball is just staring at you. And then there's a water hazard, and there's a bunker, and then there's out of bounds, and then there's wind, and there's all this different type of stuff. And then there's this really complex biomechanical movement. And when you're at the top level of the game, if your club face is 1 degree open or closed at impact, that's 30 yards offline. Right, so it's a really precise game, and actually, the way that I would approach it now, sort of like psychologically, would be so different than when I was a kid, and you know, struggling with, you know, my psychosocial development, and but I don't play at all anymore for various different reasons.
It's a crazy game. And then speaking of the word preposterous, I mean, even just sort of analysing, I mean, the attire and the equipment used by that one individual golfer could potentially be the cost of 4x the cost of the development of probably that one hole that they're working on or playing on.
Well, yeah, so it tends to be a pretty elite game, or it was traditionally, and they've tried to really open stuff up, and there are lots of programs to try and support people who come from what you might think of as just like a lower socioeconomic background, because it just costs a lot, even buying clubs and all these different types of things. So I got pretty lucky in regards to sponsorship and things like this. Some of my friends came from very wealthy families that play golf, and that was how they afforded to do it. And I had, you know, the best practical support I could from my family for a period of time as well. But then, I got very fortunate because you start getting stuff for free and you get flown all over the place. But I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't aware of the stuff that I'm aware of now. I wasn't thinking about, well, what are the ecological consequences of playing golf relative to, you know, like, or if I play this game in a capitalistic system that's effectively a zero-sum game, does that mean I'm effectively taking away from like the dinner that someone else could eat, which kind of is unfortunately how I wasn't thinking that way, you know.
Mm.
Whereas now, unfortunately, I have both the kind of like burden and the privilege of some of that knowledge.
Yeah, I don't, Nathan. You've
Yeah.
just been growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's done so, very, or attempted to do so very deliberately.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so good. Hey, look, we cover a lot of topics here on the Luke Farr Show, which I absolutely love. We keep everyone on their toes. It's very versatile. I've done some research. You once mentioned in a statement, Nathan, in an interview actually at a corporate event, you said 10x decrease in time to comprehension, which is really meaningful. From time to comprehension, I mean, just break that down for the audience. What does that mean exactly, and why is this so meaningful?
So I'm assuming that this would have been in relation to, so I've done a lot of work on
Data related. Yeah.
data sharing stuff, which has been quite influential in the development of various different standards around the world. But that was probably in relation to something like work that I've done on like financial services contracts and things like that. So we have big issues. So like, let's say you're going to go get a loan. And you're served with all of these really like quite esoteric documents that aren't written for you. They're written by lawyers pretty much for other lawyers to understand. And they're not really written to inform you. They're kind of written to protect the organization. So they're just starting from the wrong place, right? But what we also see is when we look at behavioral event log data, which is like quantitative data, that shows us, well, what now it doesn't tell us why, but it tells us what are people doing online when they're trying to get a loan. Oh, they click here and then they scroll here and then you're right. People are often bypassing these agreements. So they're getting a personal loan. Let's say it's for 50,000 Aussie or New Zealand dollars, right? And they're not even reading the loan document, right? Now, banks would never want to tell you that this is happening. They're not publishing this data, right? But working with inside these organizations, we get to see the data and we're like, holy crap. People are not making informed decisions here. Now, and a lot of this stuff is based on like rational actor theory and these different economic things that just have no play in the real world, right? Like no play in the real world whatsoever. And so we go, oh my gosh. Well, okay, so there's this financial instrument, and people clearly aren't willing to go through the arduous process of reading 32,000 words. So what is it that we can do to empirically demonstrate that they are quite well informed at the point at which they make the decision? And so we engage in all these different design tactics and then research practices to try and explore what techniques are actually going to work. And then we put them to the test empirically. And what we were able to demonstrate is using something that we developed called the Better Disclosure Toolkit, which just drew on like different areas of the behavioral and design sciences and stuff like that and brought them together into a specific applied context. And we were able to demonstrate in many different scenarios that we could massively decrease the time it took for people to be kind of like genuinely ready to make an informed decision. And we were able to deploy that in lots of contexts. And what the long-term effects of that are, I don't know, Luke. But I think, and so what's the importance of that? Well, it means like when you enter into some debt agreement that's like 7 or 8 years for something like a $50,000 personal loan, maybe a little bit longer. The interest rates tend to be like, it's a huge commitment. You've at least got a sense of what you're getting into. You kind of have a sense of the pros and cons. You've got a sense of the spectrum of consequences, because there's some good, there's some bad, and you can make a reasonably logical decision. Now, we're not just logical, we're super emotional and we're deeply irrational in lots of different ways, and there's lots of like automatic functions and stuff like that play out, but you're going to be reasonably well equipped. And what that should mean is that we're doing more responsible lending. It should mean that, people are not really overextending and then creating all of this stress, which has deleterious effects on their relationships, their well-being, the way that they can parent their children, all that type of jazz. So that's why decreasing time to comprehension in such a context matters so much. I'm so surprised you brought that up. I haven't been doing much of that work for a long time. So
Yeah. I like to catch you off guard. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
nice.
Well, to be fair, we're playing a game of golf here, and to be fair, we're going back and forth. But however, the question that I sent you prior, you literally answered the question before I even asked the question. You answered it, and I thought, am I going to be able to do my job here? We would like to pivot and keep people on their toes. Hey,
Nice.
you mentioned often the word, and I just for the audience out there, I think it's quite important actually, and imperative to this conversation. But you mentioned the word empirical, then we mentioned the word evidence. Empirical evidence. What is the difference, and how do they separate between evidence and what is empirical? I would imagine it's something to do with the fact that there is either double-blind tests and everything that it is just a far more thorough test of the evidence, right? But yeah, just run us through when everyone uses the term "this is empirical evidence." What?
Well, so it actually it gets used in different ways. So typically empirical, traditionally rather, not typically, traditionally, empirical was sort of like learning through direct experience, like learning about the world through direct experience. But what we tend to mean now, when a scientist is on TV or a science communicator is on TV and they say something like empirical evidence, they tend to mean within the domain of what might be recorded, or rather the paradigm of what's called sort of like reductionist, materialist scientific paradigm. Now, lots of complexity around all of this stuff, right? But like they tend.
Let's keep it quite streamlined.
Yeah, so they tend to mean that there are studies that have been conducted that we have like produced quantitative data from, that we think is reasonably reliable, and that we can interpret to suggest something. Like that's kind of what they're getting at. So when I say in that,
I say, and if they weren't to use the word empirical, what would be the contrary to that by just using the word evidence?
Well, so yeah, no, that's a really good question. So we could say my first person experience of, and I'll just go back to the example from before, the contract, right? My first person experience, which is like basically like so my first person experience of engaging with the contract was like this. That's a form of evidence. It's just in our current sort of paradigm of science, there's a thing called like the hierarchy of evidence, and that type of evidence, which is like basically just a story that someone has.
Well, it would
anecdote.
An anecdote, yeah.
An anecdote, right, is not no evidence. It's just given less credence and thought to be less reliable than, say, a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial.
Sure, it's a personal experience.
Yeah, but it still can be valid. You can't necessarily make generalized claims or assertions off the back of that. So, but there's lots of complexity, and even I got to admit, Luke, even within the sciences, these things do get used different ways. So it's important to just, when someone says something like that, sometimes we just take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but normally they probably mean there have been reasonably well designed studies that are fit for the context of the investigation, and they've produced some sort of quantitative data, and out of that, we can be relatively confident of something.
I love that. Also, what perks my ears a lot there, why did you use the term pinch of salt, not a grain of salt? Are you just trying to be super different? I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, it's like
you were about to say grain, and you said, "How can I differentiate?" Oh, yeah.
Well, no, I normally say pinch because it feels more visceral. Like when you actually get a pinch, you're not just getting one grain.
Correct.
Right?
Oh, I love that. That is so true. Gosh, I'll tell you what, we're learning a lot today on the Luke Farr Show. Hey, I have read there, and I love this wording, but I want to frame this to you, and then I've got a question after it.
Yeah, cool.
So you've written, I do this working inside and out, starting with a process that enhances an organization's capacity to do ethics really well.
Yep.
From this basis, we design, test, and operationalize features of organizational trustworthiness, which includes benevolence, integrity, and normative competence. These features, when consistently expressed, enhance both trust and reputation. Enhanced trust and reputation create a far more favorable social license to operate, which is necessary for any organization to thrive by doing good. If you were to explain that to a 13-year-old in a few simple sentences, Nathan, would you say?
Okay, so every organization wants to be able to do the stuff they want to do. And what we tend to suggest is that when the market, like consumers, citizens, regulators, it's investors, etc., when they're happy with what the organization's doing, and they're basically gifting the organization what's called social license to operate. They're all saying, hey, we're pretty happy with this. Keep doing it. Thanks. So that's what organizations want. What I'm saying is, I think the best way to do that is by starting off, not out there in the world saying, hey, what can we demonstrate to people in order to get that social license? But what type of organization do we actually want to be? What are the things that we value? How do we want to express those values? And so when I say ethics, what I mean is the process that we execute in a given situation to reflect on our first order beliefs, like our beliefs about what the good and right thing to do is, in order to make the best possible decision, to guide the best possible action that most likely leads to good consequences, or as many good and as few bad as possible. So I help the organization do that first. If we do that well, it is going to help the organization evolve in such a way that it's more benevolent, more integrous, and more normatively competent. And normatively competent, I just mean what I said before, getting really good at doing good.
Is that what you explained to a 13-year-old?
Well, yeah, I actually, I would actually. I think that, your average 13-year-old.
No, you explained that very well.
Pretty darn smart, right? They're probably smarter than, we give them credit for. And then I would say, if the organization does that really well, then they're probably going to be highly trusted. They're probably going to have a really good reputation. And I reckon that social license is basically the combination of trust and reputation. So that's kind of the way that I work with organizations. Whereas a lot of people that focus on trust, they kind of start out in the world. And I'm just like, but you can't control what's out there in the world. What we can control, or at least directly influence, is the stuff that we do in here. So let's focus on what we can control and what we can directly influence. And I reckon there's a really good chance that that positively translates to good stuff out in the world.
I love that. And speaking of control and influence, which leads me to, I drawed up this quote from Eckhart Tolle. The past has no power over the present moment. But yeah, that was his quote, just to hyphen. The past has no power over the present moment. However, yet our past created our program and yet dictates our everyday actions, doesn't it?
Yeah. So wait, was his quote the whole thing or just the first part?
So my part, sorry.
Yeah, so you've added, right?
So I'll do it again. So Eckhart Tolle's quote was simply this: the past has no power over the present moment. And that's it. Yep. And then I added to that as a question, and just out of the basis of obviously probably me having no empirical evidence over this. This is an anecdotal. But my then, and I wanted to present it to you. I was like, but yet our past has been created by our program, which dictates our everyday actions, doesn't it?
Yeah. So look,
our subconscious is based on the program of our past.
Yeah. So
Eckhart's saying the past has no power over this present moment, and I do understand two sides. But can you help me, because you are far more intelligent than I am? So just help me unpack that with my minuscule brain here. That'd be great.
Yeah. I look. I don't know how true that latter part is, but let's. Okay. So I'm not super familiar with Eckhart Tolle, although I Although I know, so I think he's something like a meditation / spiritual teacher that teaches people here-ness and now-ness and something like that. Now, without really knowing where that statement is coming from, it's super hard to be like, how wrong is it? But it's probably at least partly wrong, because so what's he maybe saying? Maybe he's saying something like, I don't, it's
Well,
interesting.
okay. Well, I can try and chip in there. So
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of some sort of literal, okay, you're on an airplane, right?
Mhm.
And you know, a turbulence. The plane might be able to, a plane potentially might be about to crash, and you're in that present moment. Nothing to do with the past is going to impact or shape any form of outcome of what's going on in that present moment.
Well, no, that's ridiculous. If that's literally what he's saying, it's ridiculous. It's just not how we understand the universe to work. Recognizing that as finite beings, we can never understand the whole universe in its entirety. We're always going to have imperfect knowledge. But I think if that's literally what he means, it's ridiculous, and it's almost there is this there's this law or rule that and I can't remember what it's called. My cognition is failing me here to some extent, or at least my accuracy of recall is failing me here to some extent. But it's basically something along the lines of, it's at least an order of magnitude harder to refute bullshit than it is to propose something bullshit in the first place. And I think this might probably be something like that. So the effort required to refute such a statement would require us to try and understand a bunch of different stuff, like how the human organism develops in a sort of like agent arena setting, how our past influences like construction of self and the different forms of self, and how that's expressed in the world. You then get into stuff like indeterminacy versus sort of determinism, and all these different sort of like metaphysical things. But if that's literally what he's saying, I think that's ridiculous. I think that our past it doesn't have to, as in like mechanistically determine our future, but it absolutely influences where we are now, how we make sense of the world, and therefore what the possibility space for action is going forward.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think he has quite a big following and stuff, though, right?
Let's just burn Eckhart Tolle. Yeah. Just forget I ever brought that up. No, he's massive and he's great. He wrote the book Power of Now. No.
Yeah, and I don't know his work, so I'm not having a stab at him as a person or anything. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah.
No. We're definitely going to hold you accountable for that. No, that's great. Hey, speaking of, we referenced that earlier a little bit, and I want to talk about this around, we speak about the world and how we all interpret it and everything like that. And in your opinion, Nathan, where would this world be without design?
Yeah.
Would it not even exist?
Well,
like everything we think of around in this world,
human civilization wouldn't, if by design we mean something loosely like trying to make sense of the world, having some goals, using the way that we make sense of the world to direct us towards our goals, and whatever that process is being something like design, then human civilization wouldn't exist in the way that it does now. And therefore anything that we might recognize as like the modern human world wouldn't exist. But then it depends how far we take what we mean by design. Like, is the processual nature of evolution design? Is it a form of design? So you'd still probably have organisms that evolve in relation to their environment to become, more adaptive, et cetera, et cetera. So you would have a world. You would probably have complex organisms and complex life forms. You would probably have like what is referred to as minded animals, but you wouldn't have what's sometimes referred to as sort of like person's culture. or culture
Yeah,
persons.
Well, you quite simply have a world that was how it was when dinosaurs were around.
Yeah, something more like that, you know.
Because
Yeah.
I don't think there was any intent design back then, was it? No.
Yeah, not the way that we think of it. And, you know, we of course, we always anthropomorphize everything because we can only ever know from our perspective. But yeah, like it's such a good question. I think, and what would we even be? We wouldn't be human. We wouldn't be human the way that we think of human now, because these like general problem solving, like we have very advanced capacities for general problem solving, which sometimes sort of like loosely sort of referred to as kind of intelligence, and our cognition is quite different to other species. You know, there's this idea of it's actually a really simple idea actually called agent arena relations, and basically it just means like agent is like you or I, and the arena is like our environment, and we're always trying to model our environment, and our environment's always trying to model us. So there's this mutual sort of modeling process where we're shaping it, it's shaping us. It's like it's a dynamical cycle. It's a bit like an infinity loop type of thing, right?
Wow.
And so humans are incredibly good at that. Like, and sometimes that has deleterious effects. Like we've created this incredible global civilization, which has so many flaws, right? But as we've created this incredible global civilization, we're eroding the capacity for that global civilization to continue, because we rely on like systems, like Earth systems, in order to, and we're destroying them. So, you know, so it's like this crazy sort of paradox. Like our success,
quite a conundrum, isn't it?
It's quite a conundrum, and it's kind of like it's the conundrum of our time. It's like how do we come back into healthy relation with the finite nature of this world, so that the beauty that is present within humanity can continue.
She's fantastic. Hey, look, I know we've got to go soon, but I just want to quickly whip into systems theory. You're very well aware of, and for anyone out there, it is an interdisciplinary framework that studies the relationships, interactions, and interdependencies between components within a complex system. This theory claims that, this theory could claim that families are systems of interconnected and interdependent individuals, none of whom can be understood in isolation. Why is that?
So actually,
do we need 2 hours for this? You like I love to say he's trying to wrap up with it, and you're like, mate,
you just asked the biggest question.
Yeah, the biggest. You're like, once again, explain it to a 13-year-old.
Well, you know, the agent arena thing that I was just describing.
I was,
like that's actually that's a quite a nice way of looking at it. So, like I was you know, I was conceived, I gestated, I was birthed, I was raised, and it was, you know, there was a family structure, a family unit, and so part of my arena was them, and I can never be separated from my arena. So if you want to make sense of who is Nate, what is this thing that we call Nate? How does this thing we call Nate work? It's very hard to do that in isolation, because we don't exist in a vacuum. And one of the things that general systems theory, complexity science, etc., can do quite well is help really bring like nuance and richness to our understanding of just phenomena in general. And it could be the phenomena of Luke, and you as a social primate and culture person and all this different type of stuff. So that's a kind of nice way of thinking about it. We can never be separated from our environment, and to some extent our social relations, our family, etc., our community, that's part of our environment. And one of the best ways to make sense of a given phenomena is to understand, how does it interact with, how does it how is it situated, how might it have emerged from, you know, what came prior to it, etc. So general systems theory and other related disciplines can be very helpful in establishing sort of like deeper and more nuanced knowledge about those types of really complex questions.
Absolutely love that, and I want to leave you with this, and I want your interpretation of this with a brain of yours and not a brain of mine. I just try to understand how Nate thinks about things. Give up defining yourself to yourself or to others. You won't die. You will come to life. And don't be concerned with how others define you. When they define you, they are limiting themselves. So it's their problem. Whenever you interact with people, don't be there primarily. Don't be there primarily as a function or a role. Oh, actually, that wasn't worded right. Don't be there primarily as a function or a role, but as the field of conscious presence. You can only lose something that you have, but you cannot lose something that you are. Very profound. How do you interpret that? But I mean, I probably didn't word that last, but why? Because I'm literally, as everyone knows, and
where did that come from? Can I ask?
Oftentimes I read things, and that's fine. But the way it was worded, whenever you interact with people, don't be there primarily as a function or a role. But that doesn't make sense. Don't be their primary function or a role, but as the field of conscious presence. You can only lose something that you have, but you cannot lose something that you are.
Yeah, it's a very sort of mystical, spiritual kind of statement. Where does that come from? Can I ask?
I came up with it myself. Yeah.
Okay, so
that's from the Book of Luke. Yeah. No, it's not. No, it's from one of the aristocrats back in the day.
Right. So.
I mean, how do you interpret it? Do you see it as just a lot of spiritual waffle?
Well, no, I definitely wouldn't look at it that way. I think we've developed a very unhealthy relationship with stuff like that in the West for various different reasons. You asked some very challenging closing questions with time constraints. So I would say something like, so there are a few different views in there. One of them is sort of like a Kantian kind of view. You are not a means to an end. You are an end in of yourself, which is very powerful. And so I'm getting some flavorings of that early on. Then the stuff.
Yeah, I love it how you're speaking to this quote as if it's a dish. I'm getting flavorings of this. I'm getting a spice of that. I'm getting a little depth here.
Absolutely. Like let's language is one of the, we have this unique capacity for very complex technical language. We may as well use it, playfully and thoughtfully,
I agree. Can I just quickly jump in there and apologize for putting you on the spot last minute with such a sort of toe tangled, tongue competitive type scenario to wrap this up? But
no, it's a good one. So I'm getting some of the Kantian sort of stuff in there, and it's certainly not the only theorist to ever suggest something like that. And then the latter stages that in that quote. There's something, in the philosophy, there are many theories about what is mind, what is consciousness, right? And we're not going to cover all of that right now. But some people believe that like consciousness is everything, mind is everything. Others believe that there isn't actually even such thing as mind. It's like an epiphenomena. Like we think there's something, but it's not doing anything. But there is something like there is a claim being made there about the nature of our essential being, that like our consciousness is sort of like irreducible, and maybe that is what really is us. Like we're not necessarily a super organism, and the way that our biology has evolved has given rise to our consciousness, and when we die, our consciousness, that's it. Maybe there is something more essential to us. I'm kind of getting that type of message toward the end of what you suggested.
100%. No, yeah. Phenomenal way to interpret it, and we'll leave it there. Well, you do. Look, we don't have too much time, but you literally brought it up within your explanation there, and the term death. And just before we leave, and it'd be great to leave on such a positive note. But are you scared of death?
I don't know, mate. I've had a lot of issues with fear actually in the past, and had a lot of like fear disorders, like psychophysiological, sometimes referred to as psychophysiological disorders or mind-body syndromes or neuroplastic symptoms. They're framed different ways depending on, which researcher or scholar. But
what does it ultimately mean, though?
So ultimately, it means that
you're scared of death, or
no, it's not necessarily something to do with finitude or mortality or whatever. It could be like a specific fear, or it could be a way in which the human organism that is you is has repressed emotion, and that then comes out in terms of physical symptoms, but actually they're caused by more psychosocial sort of stuff. And, you know, so but that's a whole whole can of worms to that we can't open now. So I've had a lot of these.
I think that you and I might share that. So I don't know, in full sincerity, yeah, I think I literally suffered. Yeah, it's been a big issue for the.
Yeah, and I can definitely share a bunch of interesting stuff on that if it's helpful. But
anxiety would be some form of a symptom of all that. Or?
It absolutely could, but I haven't really had so much that. I've had more like fatigue and all different types of things like that. Like, so I was diagnosed with long COVID, but it turned out that it was a psychophysiological thing. And then I worked with researchers at Harvard University who were running studies on that particular hypothesis, and was better within 3 weeks. And it had nothing to do. There was no physiological damage, nothing wrong with my physiology, but I was basically crippled for 10 months. Wow. So I've had some very extreme, but my relation to death.
But you're a lot better now.
Yes, much better. Now I still have little flares, but it tends to be when there is emotional imbalance within me, or I'm becoming hypervigilant about a particular thing. Right. So
right.
But my physiology, thankfully, very thankfully, is and I've had every test under the sun a number of times. It's really
completely different to OCD or any of those things.
Well, whether it has a relation, I'm not sure. But I don't think I have what you would think of as kind of like clinical obsessive compulsive disorder. But so I have had issues, lots of issues with fear in the past. But how do I relate to death? I don't know. I know I'm going to die.
Well, some people haven't accepted it. I mean, I personally haven't accepted it. I'm very afraid of it, and I don't know why. Because sleep is like sleep's the cousin of death, right? So it's like we literally die. Like when we're unconscious and we go into REM sleep for a period of anywhere between 6 to 8 hours. That is the closest thing to death. And then recently I was in surgery. When you go under that to me is what death is. You're gone.
Well, maybe that's a metaphysical assumption that's being made there. I don't know. Maybe consciousness is a property of the universe, and maybe we are an expression of that. Maybe we do exist to help the universe learn about itself. I don't know. Those aren't necessarily super popular beliefs, particularly within a sort of modern scientific analytical philosophy type paradigm. But I don't know what's going to happen after death, but what I know that whatever this is going to die. How
reincarnation? Do we come back? We are going to leave it because this could be another topic. But this is interesting because so when there is a newborn baby, obviously that's coming from the two humans that created it through sperm and everything and all of the biological.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But who's to say that when we die, we're not coming back as that baby?
Yeah, many people will say that you're not.
How could we not do that?
Yeah, well, it's very hard because that's you cannot scientifically, experimentally tease that out. That's really the role of metaphysics, mysticism, etc. And so you'll have you have metaphysicians, a particular branch of philosophy, who take that very seriously. They believe that there is like an essential stuff that is us, and that might be referred to as our soul, right? Soul and psyche have basically mean the same thing, even though they come from different parts of the world. And that maybe the soul, kind of gets recycled. There are lots of.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Nate.
Yeah.
Let me just pose this to you.
Go for it.
So when we die, we go. Okay, this is part. We're not getting cremated. Okay, we go into the ground. Mm-hmm. That ground, all our cells and everything dies. Mm-hmm. That could potentially form into a plant. That plant. This is just,
totally. Yeah.
The plant then becomes the pollen, the bee and the pollen. Then it becomes honey. Someone eats the honey. We're still within that whole cycle. The person that's eating that honey, we then are reborn again through, if they do have a kid, potentially. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, and this
is that plausible, or is that just absolutely? That could be woo-woo. I'm not sure.
Well, no. But it's not you. It's so your particulate matter. But your 98% of your particulate matter is completely recycled within a 12-month period, right? So
Didn't know
so
that. You learn
what?
a lot here on the
Yeah.
loop, but
So
really,
what?
in
Yeah. So
12
what?
months.
Yeah. What made you 13 months ago at the sort of like subatomic level is not you anymore. So what is you? And there's actually a very famous philosophical thought experiment about this.
Wow.
About if you had a boat basically, and you slowly take away the parts, but each time you replace it with something new, at the end you have a boat that looks identical, but none of the timber is the same. Is it still the same boat? Right. And this is
Depending on the conditions it's sailed in.
well, yeah, but then again, it's like, what is the boat? So there are some and therefore, what is you, right? And this is, and
I get the
there
analogy. Wow.
are some very good, we attempted scientific explanations of this, but actually, this is where philosophy and science have to work very wholesomely. And science comes out of philosophy and out of natural philosophy and stuff like that. But there's been quite a lot of decoupling, and a less than optimally healthy relationship often between philosophy and science over the last few hundred years. Some scientists believe that basically the role of good philosophy is keeping bad philosophy away from science. So they don't look at philosophy very favorably, but what they don't seem to realize is that itself is a philosophical statement, not a scientific statement. So you cannot avoid philosophy.
Right.
Philosophy is everywhere. Philosophy underpins pretty much everything. So we're here to stay, people. We're here to stay.
I absolutely love that. I wish we had 4 hours, mate. I know we're both time poor, but mate, I do want to literally say thank you so much for coming on the show to educate, motivate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. And you've certainly done that, mate. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hopefully having many more conversations in the future.
Likewise, mate. Thank you so much for having me. It's a different. I didn't know what I was going to expect, but this was cool. This is very exploratory.
Very exploratory, and a huge shout out too, because I've got a huge appreciation to perfection when it comes to hair. You've got whoever. No, I'm serious. Whoever the barber is, mate. Big shout out, obviously, for the audience out there. You're not going to pay for a ticket to fly to Melbourne, but your barber has done a phenomenal job. He's got everything in juxtaposition, and it is fantastic. And I'm actually about to go get a haircut and a shave.
Nice.
And I aim to achieve the same metrics there because I get a very similar. So it is confirmation bias almost. But
thanks, mate. I appreciate that. And I will let my barber know. Yeah.
let him know, mate. I'll hit stop record quickly.